I never thought I'd be the kind of man telling this story. But here I am, 53 years old, sitting in my study in Manchester, staring at an empty passport photo frame that once held her picture. Her name was Naruemon, and she destroyed my life so completely that I'm still picking up the pieces 3 years later. If you think you know how this story ends, trust me, you don't. What she did to me was worse than theft, worse than betrayal. She took something from me that I can never get back, and by the time I realized what was happening, it was already too late. Before we dive into this nightmare, I need you to do me a favor. If stories about real people facing real consequences interest you, hit that subscribe button. Because what I'm about to tell you isn't just entertainment, it's a warning. And maybe, just maybe, it might save someone else from making the same catastrophic mistakes I did. My name is Andrew Bennett, and until 4 years ago, I thought I had life figured out. I was a successful insurance broker in Manchester, owned a beautiful Victorian house in Didsbury, drove a BMW, and had been married to Sarah for 22 years. We had everything planned out, our retirement, travel, growing old together. Then Sarah got diagnosed with ovarian cancer, and in 18 months, my entire world collapsed. The funeral was on a Tuesday in March, gray skies, persistent drizzle, everything you'd expect from a Manchester goodbye. I remember standing there watching them lower her coffin, thinking this couldn't be real. 22 years of marriage, and suddenly I was alone in a house that felt like a mausoleum. Every corner held memories, her coffee mug still in the sink, her book still bookmarked halfway through, her side of the bed still smelled like her perfume. The grief counselor said I needed to get away, try something different, break the cycle of depression that was consuming me. So 6 months after the funeral, I did something completely out of character. I booked a 3-week trip to Thailand. Not some luxury resort package, just a simple flight to Bangkok and a loose plan to figure things out as I went. Sarah had always wanted to visit Asia, but we never made the time. I thought maybe I could do it for both of us. Bangkok overwhelmed me immediately. The heat, the noise, the chaos of traffic and street vendors and foreign smells I couldn't identify. I lasted 2 days before catching a bus south to Pattaya, thinking a beach town might be more manageable for a grieving widower who'd barely left Manchester in decades. I checked into a modest hotel near the beach, nothing fancy, just somewhere clean and quiet where I could try to figure out what came next. That's where the story really begins. Not in the hotel, but on the seaside promenade on my third evening in Pattaya. I was walking alone, watching the sunset paint the Gulf of Thailand in shades of orange and pink, when I heard someone crying. Soft sobs, the kind that come from deep pain. I turned and saw her sitting on a bench about 20 meters away, her face buried in her hands. She was small and delicate, probably in her late 20s with long black hair that caught the evening light. She wore a simple white dress and sandals, nothing flashy or attention-seeking. Just a young woman crying alone by the ocean, and something about the scene struck me as heartbreakingly familiar. I'd done my share of crying alone since Sarah died. I should have kept walking, any rational man would have. But grief makes you do irrational things, and loneliness makes you reach for connections you'd normally avoid. I approached slowly, the way you might approach a frightened animal. "Excuse me," I said softly. "Are you all right?" She looked up, and I saw the most beautiful face I'd encountered in years. Not magazine beautiful, but genuinely lovely in a way that seemed almost innocent. Her eyes were red from crying, mascara slightly smeared, but when she looked at me, I felt something I hadn't felt since Sarah's illness began. A spark of interest in another human being. "Sorry," she said in accented English. "I not bother you. Today is difficult day." Her voice was soft, musical, with that particular Thai accent that makes English sound almost lyrical. I sat down on the bench, leaving respectful space between us. "Difficult days are something I understand," I said. "I'm Andrew, by the way. Andrew Bennett Naruemon," she replied, wiping her eyes with a tissue. "You are tourist. From England?" "Manchester," I confirmed. "And yes, just visiting." What about you? Are you from Pattaya? She shook her head. From Aisan, northeast Thailand. Very poor province. I come Pattaya for work, but today I lose my job at restaurant. Owners say I too slow, not friendly enough with customers. The story came out slowly. She'd moved to Pattaya 6 months earlier, trying to escape poverty in rural Thailand. Her family depended on money she sent home. Her father was sick, couldn't work. Her younger brother needed money for university. The restaurant job had been her lifeline, and now it was gone. I don't know what to do, she said, fresh tears starting. Maybe I go back to village, work in rice field like my mother. But family need money I cannot make there. Something about her situation resonated with me. The desperation, the feeling of being trapped by circumstances beyond your control. I'd felt similar emotions watching Sarah fade away, helpless to stop it. Where are you staying? I asked. Small room near market, very cheap, but not nice place for woman alone. We talked for another hour as darkness fell around us. She told me about her family, her dreams of a better life, her fears about the future. I found myself sharing things I hadn't told anyone, not even the grief counselor. How empty my life felt without Sarah, how scared I was of going back to Manchester and facing decades of loneliness. When we finally parted that evening, I felt more human than I had in months. She was staying only a few blocks from my hotel, so I offered to walk her home. The streets were busy with tourists and vendors, but I noticed how some of the local men looked at her, and I was glad she wasn't walking alone. Thank you, Andrew, she said when we reached her building. You are a very kind man. Most people, they see crying woman and walk away. Maybe we could have dinner tomorrow, I suggested, surprising myself. I mean, if you'd like to. I don't know anyone here and you seem nice. Her face lit up with the first genuine smile I'd seen from her. I would like that very much, she said. There is good restaurant near beach, not expensive. We can eat and talk more. Walking back to my hotel that night, I felt something I'd forgotten was possible. Hope. Not just attraction, though I was certainly attracted to her, but genuine hope that maybe this trip could be more than just running away from grief. Maybe I could help someone who needed help, and maybe that would help me in return. I slept better that night than I had in months. When I woke up the next morning, I was actually looking forward to something for the first time since Sarah's diagnosis. I had no idea I was walking into the most elaborate and devastating trap of my life. Our dinner the next evening exceeded my expectations in every way. Naruemon had suggested a small Thai restaurant away from the main tourist strips, the kind of place where locals ate and the food was authentic. She looked beautiful in a simple blue dress, her hair loose around her shoulders, and when she smiled, I felt like I was 25 again instead of 53. You like spicy food? She asked as we looked at the menu. I'll try anything once, I said, which made her laugh. Careful what you promise, she teased. Thai people, we like very spicy. She ordered for both of us, speaking rapid Thai with the waitress, occasionally glancing at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. When the food arrived, it was indeed spicy enough to make my eyes water, but also the most flavorful meal I'd had in Thailand. So tell me about Manchester, she said as we ate. What is your life like there? I found myself describing my old life, the business, the house, the routine that Sarah and I had built together, but talking about it with Naruemon, it didn't feel like remembering a museum exhibit. It felt like sharing something real with someone who was genuinely interested. You must be very successful, she said. Insurance business, it is good money? I do well enough, I replied. Or did. I've been taking time off since my wife passed. Her expression softened immediately. I am sorry. How long were you married? 22 years. She died of cancer 8 months ago. Naruemon reached across the table and touched my hand gently. That is very sad. You must love her very much. I did, I said, and realized it was the first time I'd used past tense without feeling guilty about it. And now you are alone in big house in Manchester. Yes, it's difficult. Everything reminds me of her. Maybe, she said carefully. Sometimes it is good to make new memories. Not to forget old ones, but to have new ones too. The conversation shifted to her life, and she painted a picture of rural Thailand that was both beautiful and heartbreaking. Rice paddies stretching to the horizon, water buffalo and ancient temples, but also grinding poverty and limited opportunities. My father, he worked construction until accident hurt his back, she explained. Now he cannot work. My mother sell vegetables in market, but not much money. My brother, he very smart, but university costs too much. What would you do if money wasn't a problem? I asked. Her eyes lit up. I would study. Maybe nursing or business. Help my family, but also make something of myself. In Thailand, if you are a poor woman from village, people think you are stupid, but I am not stupid. No, I agreed. You're definitely not stupid. After dinner, we walked along the beach. The night air was warm and humid, filled with the sounds of waves and distant music from beachfront bars. Naruemon slipped her hand into mine as we walked, and I felt a flutter of excitement I thought I'd never experience again. Andrew, she said as we sat on the sand watching the lights of fishing boats on the horizon, can I ask you something personal? Of course. When you go back to England, what will you do? Will you try to find new wife? The question caught me off guard. I hadn't really thought about it. Sarah and I, we were together so long, I don't know if I could start over with someone new. But you are still a young man, only 53, yes? You have many years left. It would be sad to spend them alone. What about you? I asked. Do you want to get married someday? She was quiet for a long moment. In Thailand, for a woman like me, marriage is complicated. Thai men, they want women who never work in tourist area. They think we are bad girls. Foreign men, they come for vacation, have fun, then leave. Not many want real relationship. That seems unfair. Life is not fair, she said simply. But maybe sometimes good things happen anyway. We sat in comfortable silence, and I found myself thinking about possibilities I'd never considered. What if I didn't go back to Manchester right away? What if I extended my trip, spent more time getting to know this fascinating woman? What if Sarah's death wasn't the end of my story, but just the end of one chapter? When I walked Naruemon home that night, she hesitated at the entrance to her building. Would you like to come up for coffee? She asked. My room is small but clean. I knew what she was really asking, and I knew I should say no. Too fast, too soon, too complicated. But loneliness is a powerful force, and she was looking at me with such hope in her eyes. Just coffee, I said, and she smiled. Her room was indeed small, just a bed, a tiny table, and a corner with a hot plate and mini refrigerator. But it was spotlessly clean and decorated with small touches that made it feel like home. Photos of her family, a small Buddha statue, flowers in a water glass. She made instant coffee and we sat on the bed talking. Somehow the conversation became more intimate, more personal. She told me about her dreams, her fears, her loneliness in a big city where she knew no one. I told her about the emptiness of my house, the silence that followed me everywhere, the way I'd started talking to Sarah's photograph just to hear a human voice. You are a good man, Andrew, she said softly. I can see it in your eyes. Kind man. Sarah was lucky woman to have you love her. When she kissed me, it felt like coming back to life. Gentle at first, then more passionate as we held each other on that narrow bed in her tiny room. Making love to her wasn't like making love to Sarah. It was different, new, but it felt right in a way I hadn't expected. Afterward, as we lay together in the darkness, she traced patterns on my chest with her finger. This is nice, she whispered. I forgot how good it feels to be held by someone who cares. I care, I said, and realized I meant it. I know, I can feel it. I stayed until dawn, then walked back to my hotel in the early morning light feeling more alive than I had in months. Tourists and vendors were already setting up for another day, but I barely noticed them. All I could think about was Naruemon, the way she felt in my arms, the way she looked at me like I was someone worth knowing. That was the beginning of the most intense 2 weeks of my adult life. We spent every day together, exploring Pattaya, eating at local restaurants, walking on the beach, talking for hours about everything and nothing. She showed me parts of Thailand I never would have seen as a regular tourist, markets where no one spoke English, temples hidden in residential neighborhoods, street food stalls where the locals ate. But it was the evenings I remember most clearly. Back in her tiny room, making love and talking until dawn, learning each other's bodies and stories with the desperate intensity of people who know their time is limited. She was passionate and vulnerable and funny and smart, everything I'd thought I'd never find again. "I wish you could stay longer," she said one night as we lay tangled in her sheets. "My visa expires in 5 days," I reminded her. "I know, but after you leave, what happens? Do you go back to Manchester and forget about silly Thai girl?" "You're not silly, and I could never forget you." She was quiet for a moment. "Sometimes I think about what it would be like to leave Thailand, see other places, but it is impossible, Dream." "Why impossible?" "No money for travel, no passport, no education. I am just village girl who work in restaurant." Something in her voice, a wistfulness mixed with resignation, made me want to promise her the world. But I was still rational enough to keep those promises to myself. We'd known each other for 2 weeks. This could be vacation romance, the kind of thing that seems profound in tropical settings but fades back in real life. Except it didn't feel like vacation romance. It felt like something much more serious, much more dangerous. On my last night, we went to dinner at the same restaurant where we'd had our first meal together. Naruemon was unusually quiet, picking at her food, avoiding eye contact. "What's wrong?" I asked finally. "I don't want you to go," she said simply. "I know it is selfish, but I don't want you to go back to England and forget about me." "I won't forget you." "Promise?" "I promise." She reached into her purse and pulled out a small wrapped package. "I have something for you." "So you remember." Inside was a simple silver necklace with a small Buddhist pendant. "It belonged to my grandmother," she explained. "She give to me when I leave village, for protection and good luck. Now I want you to have it." "I can't take this. It's too important. That is why I want you to have it. So you remember that someone in Thailand cares about you very much." I put the necklace on and she smiled through tears that were starting to fall. "Now you must promise me something else," she said. "Anything. Promise you will think about coming back. Not now, not right away, but someday, when you're ready." "I promise." The next morning she came to the airport to see me off. We held each other at the departure gate until they called my flight, and when I walked away I could hear her crying. On the plane back to Manchester, I stared out the window at the shrinking lights of Bangkok and wondered if I was making the biggest mistake of my life. Back in Manchester, everything felt gray and lifeless after the color and intensity of Thailand. My house seemed larger and emptier than ever. My business partners welcomed me back, but I couldn't concentrate on insurance policies and actuarial tables. All I could think about was Naruemon. We talked on the phone every day, long conversations despite the time difference. She'd found another job at a hotel this time, but the pay was barely enough to cover her expenses and send money home to her family. She sounded tired and lonely, and I felt helpless being so far away. "I miss you every day," she told me during one of our calls. "Hotel work is hard. Customers sometimes not nice to Thai girls, but I think about you and it makes me strong." "I miss you too, more than I thought possible." "When will you come back?" "I don't know. Soon. I'm thinking about it, but it wasn't just thinking. I was obsessing. I found myself researching long-term visas for Thailand, looking at property rentals in Pattaya, imagining what it would be like to start over in a completely different country with a woman I'd known for 2 weeks. 3 months after I returned to Manchester, Naruemon called me in tears. "Andrew, I need help. My father, he is in hospital, heart problem. Doctors say he need operation, but it costs too much money if he don't get operation." She couldn't finish the sentence, but I understood. How much? I asked. 200,000 baht. In English money, maybe 5,000 pounds. I know it is too much to ask, but I don't know who else. I'll send it, I said without hesitation. Andrew, no, I cannot ask you for so much money. You're not asking. I'm offering. Give me your bank details. The money transfer took 2 days. When it went through, Naruemon called me sobbing with gratitude. You saved my father's life, she said. I can never repay you for this. You don't need to repay me. I'm just glad I could help. That was the first warning sign, though I didn't recognize it at the time. Not the request for money, which seemed genuine and urgent, but how good it felt to be needed. How powerful it made me feel to solve her problems with my bank account. How much her gratitude meant to me. Within a week, I'd booked another trip to Thailand. When I arrived in Bangkok 6 weeks later, Naruemon was waiting for me at the airport with tears of joy streaming down her face. She threw herself into my arms like we were lovers in a movie, and for a moment, surrounded by the chaos of Suvarnabhumi Airport, everything felt perfect. I cannot believe you are here, she said, holding me tight. I thought maybe you changed your mind. I told you I'd come back. I know, but sometimes men say things they don't mean. I'm not like other men. No, she agreed, looking up at me with those dark eyes that had haunted my dreams for months. You are different. Special. The ride to Pattaya felt like a homecoming. The familiar chaos of Thai traffic, the heat, the smells, the incomprehensible language on billboards and signs. But this time I wasn't a lost tourist running from grief. I was a man with a purpose, returning to someone who needed me. Naruemon had moved to a better apartment, still small but in a safer neighborhood. She'd also quit the hotel job. Why? I asked as we sat in her new living room, which wasn't much bigger than her old bedroom but felt like a palace compared to where she'd been. I want to spend time with you while you are here, she said. Hotel work, too many hours, no time for us. But how will you pay rent? Send money to your family? She looked down at her hands. I have small savings from money you sent from my father. Some left over, and maybe you can help a little bit while you are here. It seemed reasonable. I was planning to stay for a month this time, using up accumulated vacation time from my business. If she was going to take time off work to be with me, it made sense that I'd cover her expenses. I was certainly earning more than she ever could. Of course, I said. Don't worry about money while I'm here. That month was like living in a dream. We traveled around Thailand together, visiting temples and beaches, eating incredible food, experiencing a culture that was completely foreign to me but became magical through her eyes. She was the perfect guide and companion, patient with my terrible attempts at Thai, protective when vendors tried to overcharge me, affectionate in a way that made me feel desired and appreciated. But more than that, she seemed genuinely interested in building something with me. She introduced me to her friends, taught me about Thai customs and traditions, talked about the future in ways that included both of us. If you lived in Thailand, she said one evening as we watched sunset from a beach in Koh Samet, what would you do for work? I've been thinking about that. Maybe start a consulting business, help other expats with insurance and financial planning. There's probably a market for that. You could really do that? I think so. Why? I just wonder sometimes what it would be like if you stayed. Would you want me to stay? She turned to look at me and her expression was serious. I would like that very much, but it is a big decision. Your whole life is in England. My old life was in England. Maybe it's time for a new life. When my visa expired and I had to return to Manchester, we both cried at the airport. But this time felt different. This time felt like I was leaving temporarily, not permanently. I will wait for you, she promised as I boarded my flight, however long it takes. Back in Manchester, I couldn't settle into my old routine. Everything felt temporary, like I was just marking time until I could return to Thailand permanently. I started making serious plans. Research into Thai visa requirements for retirees and business owners. conversations with colleagues about buying out my share of the business, consultations with estate agents about selling the house, Sarah's house, our house, the place where we'd planned to grow old together. Standing in our bedroom, looking at the furniture we'd chosen together, the photographs on the dresser, her jewelry box still sitting exactly where she'd left it, I felt like I was betraying her memory. But I also felt like she would have wanted me to find happiness again. She'd been the most generous person I'd ever known. She wouldn't have wanted me to spend the rest of my life alone in a shrine to our marriage. Naruemon and I talked every day, and our conversations grew more intimate and forward-looking. She started talking about what our life together could be like, the places we could travel, the business we could build together. "I could help you," she said during one call. "I speak Thai and English. I know how things work here. We could be a good team. I'd like that." "Andrew, can I ask you something?" "Of course. Are you serious about moving to Thailand? Or is this just nice dream?" "I'm serious. I've already started the process, talking to lawyers, looking at visa options." There was a long pause. "What about marriage visa?" My heart skipped. "What about it?" "If we get married, it would be easier for you to stay a long time. And for me, well, if I marry a British citizen, maybe someday I could visit England, see your country." It was the first time either of us had mentioned marriage explicitly, though it had been hovering around our conversations for weeks. The idea terrified and excited me in equal measure. "Is that something you'd want?" I asked carefully. "With right person, yes. With you, I think yes." 6 months later, I was back in Thailand, this time with a suitcase full of documents and a head full of plans. I'd sold the house in Manchester, bought out my business partners, and obtained a retirement visa that would allow me to stay in Thailand indefinitely as long as I met certain financial requirements. Naruemon met me at the airport in a new dress, with her hair professionally styled, looking more beautiful than I'd ever seen her. This time there was no expiration date on my visit. This time I was home to stay. We found a nice apartment in Pattaya, nothing luxurious but spacious and comfortable by local standards. I enrolled in Thai language classes. Naruemon and I started planning our wedding, a small ceremony that would satisfy both Thai customs and British legal requirements. But it was during those wedding preparations that I began to notice things that should have alarmed me. Small things at first. The way she always seemed to know exactly how much money I had in my accounts. Her insistence that we needed to register our marriage in England as well as Thailand as soon as possible. Her sudden interest in obtaining a British passport. "It would be good to have," she explained when I questioned the urgency. "If we want to travel to Europe or if something happened to you, I need papers to prove I am your wife." It made sense. Everything she said always made sense. But there was something in her tone, a calculation that hadn't been there before, that made me uneasy. The wedding was beautiful. Her family came down from Iseon, simple country people who seemed genuinely happy that their daughter had found a foreign husband who could provide for her. My brother flew out from Manchester, skeptical but trying to be supportive. We had the ceremony at a beach resort, mixing Thai and Western traditions, and I felt more complete than I had since Sarah's death. For the first 6 months of our marriage, everything seemed perfect. Naruemon was a devoted wife, taking care of our home, helping me navigate Thai bureaucracy, making me feel loved and appreciated. We traveled around Southeast Asia, visited her family's village, talked about starting a business together. But gradually, things began to change. She became less interested in sex, more focused on practical matters. She took over handling our finances, saying it would be easier for her to deal with Thai banks and government offices. She started talking more about wanting to visit England to see where I came from. "When can we go?" she asked one evening as we ate dinner on our balcony overlooking the Gulf of Thailand. "Soon," I said. "Maybe next year." "These things take time." "How long does it take to get British passport?" "For you, several years, I think. We have to be married for a while first, prove the relationship is genuine." Something flickered across her face, too quick for me to interpret. "Several years? But if something happened to you, I need papers." What if you get sick, die? I have nothing. You'd inherit everything. The will makes that clear. But without British passport, maybe they not let me keep money. Maybe they send me back to Thailand. Her concerns seemed reasonable, but the frequency with which she brought up the topic was starting to worry me. When I suggested we could simply enjoy being married without rushing the immigration process, she became moody and distant. The first major argument happened 8 months after our wedding. I discovered that she'd been sending significantly more money to her family than we'd agreed on, money that was coming from my accounts without discussion. It's emergency, she explained when I confronted her. My brother need money for university, my cousin getting married, my aunt sick. But we agreed on a budget. This is 3 times what we discussed. I thought you understand. Family is important in Thailand. If my family need help, we help. Of course, but we need to discuss these things. This is a lot of money. She looked at me with an expression I'd never seen before, cold and calculating. This money, it is nothing for you. You have more money than my family see in lifetime, but for them, it mean everything. That's not the point. The point is communication, partnership. Partnership? She laughed bitterly. You think this is partnership? You have all the money, all the power. I just Thai wife who asked nicely for permission. The fight escalated quickly, with her saying things that cut deep and revealed attitudes I'd never seen before, about how Western men come to Thailand because they can't find women in their own countries, about how she'd sacrificed her youth and freedom to take care of an old man, about how I should be grateful that a woman like her would even consider marrying someone like me. The cruelty of it stunned me. This wasn't the woman I'd fallen in love with, the sweet, vulnerable girl crying on a bench by the ocean. This was someone I didn't recognize, someone who seemed to view our marriage as a business transaction rather than a love story. We made up the next day with tears and apologies and promises to communicate better. But something had shifted. The mask had slipped just enough for me to see what was underneath, and I didn't like what I saw. Over the next few months, the pattern repeated. Money would disappear from our accounts. When I questioned it, she'd have explanations that seemed reasonable but were becoming increasingly expensive. Her father needed surgery again. Her brother's university fees had increased. The family farm needed repairs after a storm. Always urgent, always emotional, always presented in a way that made me feel selfish for questioning her. But it wasn't just the money. Her behavior toward me was changing too. She was less affectionate, less interested in spending time together, more focused on practical matters like my business affairs and legal documents. She started asking detailed questions about my assets, my insurance policies, my will. I just want to understand, she'd say when I expressed confusion. In Thailand, wife should know about family finances. When I suggested we could take a break from sending money to her family for a few months, just to get our own finances back on track, she became hysterical. You cannot stop helping my family, she screamed. They depend on us. Without money, my father die, my brother cannot finish school, my mother have nothing. We're not stopping forever, just taking a break until we stabilize our own situation. You promised to take care of me, take care of my family. Now you break promise. I'm not breaking any promise. I'm trying to be responsible. Responsible? Her voice was venomous. You spend more money on breakfast than my family make in 1 week. Don't talk to me about responsible. It was during this fight that she said something that chilled me to the bone. Maybe if you cannot keep promises, I should reconsider this marriage. Maybe I should go back to Thailand, find Thai husband who understand Thai woman's responsibilities. The threat was clear, and it worked. Rather than risk losing her, I agreed to continue the financial support to her family. But I started paying closer attention to where the money was going, and what I discovered made my blood run cold. If you've made it this far in my story, I need to ask you to do something. Hit that subscribe button and leave a comment below. Tell me, have you or anyone you know ever been in a situation where love blinded you to obvious red flags? Because what I'm about to tell you next is when everything fell apart, and I learned the truth about the woman I'd married. And I need to know I'm not alone in having been this foolish. The revelation came by accident. I was using Naruemon's laptop to check my email when I noticed she'd left her banking app open. What I saw there destroyed everything I thought I knew about our marriage and about her. The account showed deposits going back over 2 years, long before we'd met. Regular transfers from multiple Western Union accounts, always in amounts just under the reporting threshold. Names I didn't recognize, all Western names. David, Michael, Robert, James, at least a dozen different men, all sending money to my wife on a regular basis. But it was the amounts that made me physically sick. In the 18 months since we'd been together, she'd received over £40,000 from other men, money that had nothing to do with family emergencies or business expenses, money she'd been receiving while telling me she loved me, while planning our wedding, while making me believe I was the only man in her life. I sat staring at that screen for what felt like hours, trying to process what I was seeing. The dates, the amounts, the frequency. This wasn't some past relationship that had ended when we got serious. This was ongoing, systematic, professional. When Naruemon came home from shopping, she found me still sitting at her laptop, the banking app still open on the screen. "Andrew," she said carefully, "what are you doing?" "I think you know what I'm doing." She looked at the screen and her face went completely blank. No shame, no surprise, no attempt to explain, just empty calculation. "How long have you known?" she asked finally. "About 5 minutes. How long has this been going on?" "Which part?" "All of it. The other men, the money, the lies." She sat down across from me, and I saw her transform in real time from the woman I'd married into someone I'd never met. Her posture changed, her expression hardened, even her voice sounded different. "Since before I met you," she said matter-of-factly, "since I moved to Pattaya." "And our relationship? Our marriage? Was any of it real?" "Define real." The coldness in her voice was like a physical blow. "Did you ever love me? Ever feel anything genuine for me?" I felt grateful. "You were kind to me, generous. You made my life easier. But you never loved me. Andrew, you are a 53-year-old man who is so lonely you fell in love with first woman who was nice to you in foreign country. What did you think this was?" "I thought it was what you told me it was. 2 people who found each other, who cared about each other, who wanted to build a life together." "We did build a life together. Good life. You were happy, yes? You felt loved, felt important, felt needed. What more do you want?" "I want it to be real." "It was real for you." That should be enough. I closed the laptop and looked at this stranger sitting across from me. "The family emergencies, your father's surgery, your brother's education, all lies?" "Not all lies. My father did need surgery. My brother is in university, but the amounts," she shrugged. "Maybe I exaggerated sometimes." "Where did the money really go?" "Some to family, some to me, some I save for future." "And the other men? Are you still—" "Still what? Still talking to them? Still taking their money?" "Andrew, you are my husband now. You give me what I need. Why would I need other men?" It took me a moment to process what she was saying. "You mean you were planning to cut them off?" "Eventually. When I get British passport, when I don't need backup plan anymore." "Backup plan? You think I am stupid?" "I am poor girl from Thai village. If marriage don't work out, if you decide you don't want Thai wife anymore, what happens to me? I go back to village with nothing?" The conversation continued for hours, and with each revelation, the woman I'd loved disappeared a little more. She'd been supporting multiple online relationships simultaneously, telling each man he was special, collecting money for fabricated emergencies, maintaining an elaborate network of lies that spanned years and continents. "The night we met," I said finally, "were you really crying about losing your job?" "I was crying because the man I was supposed to meet that night canceled. He was going to give me money for my father's medicine. When he canceled, I had no money, no plan, so yes, I was really crying." And you saw me walking alone and thought I looked like easy target. I thought you looked kind, lonely, like man who needed someone to care about, someone to lie to, someone to make happy. And I did make you happy, didn't I? Before you found out you were happy. She was right, and that made it worse. I had been happy, deliriously, completely happy in a way I hadn't been since Sarah got sick. But it had all been built on lies so elaborate and long-term that they constituted a completely false identity. What happens now? I asked. What do you want to happen? I want my wife back. The woman I married, but she never existed, did she? She existed when you needed her to exist. That's not the same thing, isn't it? The next few days were a nightmare of arguments, revelations, and attempts at negotiation. Naruemon seemed genuinely confused by my anger. In her mind, she'd provided exactly what I'd wanted, love and companionship and care, and the fact that it had been performed rather than felt didn't diminish its value. You got what you paid for, she said during one particularly brutal exchange. I was a good wife. I took care of you, made you feel important, gave you reason to wake up in morning. That is worth something. It's worth everything if it's real. It's worth nothing if it's fake. Why is real so important? If I cook for you because I love you or because it is my job, food tastes the same. If I hold you because I want to or because it makes you happy, you still feel held. Her logic was airtight and completely inhuman. She'd turned love into a transaction, marriage into a performance, and couldn't understand why I found that devastating. The worst part was discovering how elaborate the deception had been. She showed me the files she kept on her laptop, detailed records of every man she was managing, their personal information, their financial situations, their emotional vulnerabilities, the stories she told each one to maintain their interest and support. David in Australia thought she was a nursing student whose mother had cancer. Michael in Germany believed she was working 2 jobs to support her disabled father. Robert in Canada had been sending money for her English classes so she could eventually move to Toronto to be with him. And me? I was the widower who needed to feel needed, the successful businessman who could afford to play white knight, the lonely man who could be relied upon for large sums as long as she maintained the right balance of affection and crisis. How many of us are there total? I asked. Active, sick, including you. And they all think they're the only one. Of course. And they all think you love them. They all think I could love them under right circumstances. That is a different thing. It was different, and it was worse. She wasn't even claiming to love any of us. She was selling the possibility of love, the fantasy of love, while keeping her actual emotions completely separate from the transaction. The investigation into her activities consumed me for weeks. I hired a private investigator in Thailand who confirmed my worst fears. Naruemon wasn't just running online scams, she was part of a larger network. Other women, other Western men, all being managed by people who specialized in long-term emotional manipulation. This is very common, the investigator told me. Professional romance scams. Your wife, she is very good at it. Most men, they figure it out after a few months, year at most. You, she keep you going for almost 2 years. Is any of it real? Her family, her background? Some true, some not true. She is from Isan, family is poor, but many details, they are created for story. Brother in university, father needing surgery, these things she used with many men. What about her real life? What does she actually want? Money, security, British passport, maybe move to England, start fresh, find rich British husband who never know about Thailand. That was when I understood the full scope of what had happened to me. I wasn't just a victim of fraud, I was a stepping stone. Everything we'd built together, everything I'd believed about our relationship had been designed to get her a British passport and citizenship. Once she had that, she could disappear, start over, become someone completely new. The British passport application had been submitted 3 months earlier. She was already halfway through the process. I confronted her with everything the investigator had found, but she showed no remorse, no shame, no recognition that what she'd done was morally wrong. You are angry because you found out, she said. If you never found out, you would still be happy. So really, you are angry at yourself for looking. I'm angry because you've been lying to me for 2 years. I gave you what you wanted. Good wife, happy marriage, reason to live after your Sarah died. You want to throw that away because you don't like how I did it? Yes, because it wasn't real. It was real for you. We were going in circles, and I realized we always would. She genuinely couldn't understand why I valued authenticity over results, why I needed love to be freely given rather than skillfully performed. To her, emotions were just another currency, and she'd been expertly managing her accounts. The divorce process was uglier than anything I'd experienced with Sarah's illness. Naruemon fought for everything, claiming she'd given up her career and youth to take care of me, that she deserved compensation for her sacrifice. Her lawyers argued that as my wife, she was entitled to half of everything, including the proceeds from the Manchester house sale. More disturbing were the threats. When it became clear that the divorce would go through and she wouldn't get the settlement she wanted, she began making ominous suggestions about what might happen to me if I didn't cooperate. Pattaya can be a dangerous place for a foreign man living alone, she said during one of our final conversations. Accidents happen, robberies, sometimes police don't investigate too carefully. Are you threatening me? I am telling you facts. You make me enemy, maybe your life in Thailand becomes difficult. I realized then that I wasn't just divorcing a dishonest wife, I was extricating myself from a criminal network that had invested 2 years in developing me as an asset. They weren't going to let me walk away easily. The private investigator advised me to leave Thailand immediately. These people, they are professionals, he warned. You cost them money, time, opportunity. They might decide to cut their losses, but they might decide to make example of you. Example how? Accident, robbery gone wrong, Western man dies, police investigate for a few days, case goes cold. Happens more than you think. Within a week, I'd liquidated everything I could, transferred money to secure accounts, and booked a flight back to Manchester. I left Thailand with 2 suitcases and a bank account that had been drained of nearly everything I'd accumulated over 25 years in business. But more devastating than the financial loss was the psychological damage. I'd gone to Thailand as a grieving widower looking for a new beginning, and I was returning as a broken man who couldn't trust his own judgment about people, about love, about reality itself. The flight back to Manchester was the longest 12 hours of my life. I sat in that airplane seat replaying every moment of my relationship with Naruemon, trying to identify where I'd missed the signs, where I'd chosen to believe lies rather than confront uncomfortable truths. The answer was everywhere. From the very first night, I'd seen what I wanted to see rather than what was actually there. Back in Manchester, I had to start completely over, new flat since I'd sold the house, new business since I'd liquidated my partnership, new life since everything I'd built in Thailand had been based on fraud. The hardest part was telling my brother what had happened. David had been skeptical of the marriage from the beginning, but he'd supported me because he wanted me to be happy. Now I had to admit that his instincts had been right, that I'd been spectacularly, expensively wrong. How much? He asked when I finished the story. Everything. The house sale, the business buyout, 2 years of living expenses and family support. Probably close to 400,000 pounds. Jesus, Andrew. I know. And you had no idea. I had suspicions, red flags, but I chose to ignore them because I didn't want to lose her. And now? Now I'm 55 years old, starting over with nothing, trying to figure out how I could have been so stupid. David was quiet for a long time. Finally, he said, "You weren't stupid. You were lonely and grieving, and she was a professional. This is what she does for a living. That doesn't make me feel better. It should. This wasn't about you being gullible. This was about her being good at her job. But I didn't feel like a victim of sophisticated fraud. I felt like an old fool who'd let his emotions override his common sense, who'd been so desperate for love and purpose that he'd ignored obvious warning signs for 2 years. The shame was almost unbearable. Not just the financial loss, though that was devastating, but the knowledge that I'd been performing the role of loving husband while she'd been performing the role of loving wife, and neither of us had been authentic. Our entire relationship had been theater, and I'd been too desperate to notice I was the only one who thought it was real. Rebuilding my life took almost 2 years. I had to start a new business from scratch, rebuild professional relationships I'd abandoned when I moved to Thailand, find new housing, new routines, new reasons to get up in the morning. But the hardest thing to rebuild was my ability to trust my own judgment. Every interaction with a woman, no matter how casual, was filtered through the lens of my experience with Naruemon. Was this person being genuine, or was she performing? Was this interest real, or was she evaluating my potential as a financial resource? Was this kindness authentic, or was it calculated? I went to therapy, which helped somewhat. The counselor explained that what I'd experienced was a form of psychological abuse called love bombing, followed by exploitation. Naruemon had identified my vulnerabilities, grief, and loneliness, and had systematically exploited them for financial gain. The fact that you were capable of love after your wife's death isn't a weakness, the therapist told me. The fact that you were generous and trusting isn't a character flaw. You were targeted by someone who specializes in identifying and exploiting those qualities. But I ignored so many red flags. Because you wanted to believe. Because the alternative, that someone would fake that level of intimacy for money, was too horrible to contemplate. How do I ever trust anyone again? Slowly, carefully, but you can't let one terrible experience prevent you from having authentic relationships in the future. That was easier said than done. Dating felt impossible when every conversation felt like a potential interrogation. I found myself analyzing women's responses for signs of manipulation, looking for hidden agendas in casual interactions, assuming the worst about people's motivations. 6 months ago, almost 3 years after returning from Thailand, I received an email that changed everything. It was from a man named Robert, one of the other men Naruemon had been scamming. "I found your name in some documents my ex-wife left behind," he wrote. "I think we may have something in common." Robert was Canadian, a retired engineer who'd lost his wife to Alzheimer's 3 years earlier. His story was heartbreakingly similar to mine. He'd met Naruemon online through a dating site, had been supporting her and her family for over a year, had been planning to marry her and bring her to Canada. Unlike me, he'd never actually traveled to Thailand to meet her in person. "She told me she was saving money for her visa application," he wrote. "Said she couldn't leave Thailand until her father recovered from his surgery. I sent almost 60,000 Canadian dollars over 18 months. We arranged to talk on the phone, and the conversation lasted 4 hours. Robert had discovered the truth the same way I had, by accidentally seeing financial records that revealed multiple men sending money simultaneously. But his investigation had gone deeper than mine. I hired a cybersecurity expert," he told me. "We traced her activities back almost 5 years. There were at least 20 men, maybe more. Americans, Australians, Europeans, Canadians, all of us thinking we were the only one. 20 men? That we could identify. Could be more. This wasn't amateur hour, Andrew. This was organized crime with sophisticated record-keeping and coordination. Robert had also discovered something I hadn't known. Naruemon wasn't even her real name. Her actual name was Siraporn Kumthai, and she had multiple identities, multiple backstories, multiple families in crisis depending on which man she was communicating with. "The woman you married," Robert said, "she doesn't exist. Naruemon was a character created specifically for you, based on psychological profiling of your communications and behavior patterns." That revelation hit me harder than discovering the other men or the money transfers. Everything I'd fallen in love with, every conversation we'd had, every moment of intimacy, had been scripted performance by someone playing a role designed to manipulate my specific vulnerabilities. "How did you find this out?" I asked. The cybersecurity guy traced her digital footprint. Different email addresses, different social media profiles, different photos sometimes. She was literally multiple people simultaneously. And the family? Her village in Isan? That part seems to be real, but everything else, the personality, the dreams, the backstory, it was all constructed for each individual mark. Robert and I began working together to contact other victims. Through social media searches and online investigation, we identified 12 more men who'd been involved with variations of Naruemon over the past 5 years. The total amount stolen was over $800,000. But more than the money, it was the psychological damage that united us. Every man told the same story: loneliness, usually following divorce or death of a spouse. A chance encounter with a beautiful, vulnerable Thai woman who seemed to need protection and support. Rapid emotional intimacy followed by escalating financial requests. Years of believing they'd found love again, only to discover they'd been expertly manipulated by a professional criminal. The worst part, said James, an American from Florida, is that I still miss her. Even knowing it was all fake, I still miss the woman I thought she was. That sentiment was echoed by everyone we spoke to. We'd all fallen in love with fictional characters, but the emotions we'd felt were real. The loss was real. The betrayal was real. The damage to our ability to trust and love again was devastatingly real. Working with the other victims gave me something I hadn't expected: purpose. We formed an informal support group sharing information about romance scams, comparing stories, helping each other heal. More importantly, we began documenting everything for law enforcement agencies in multiple countries. This is bigger than individual fraud, Robert pointed out. This is organized international crime. There are networks of people doing this professionally, targeting vulnerable Western men systematically. We compiled evidence and submitted it to Interpol, the FBI, the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, and Thai authorities. The response was mixed. Some agencies were interested, others treated it as civil rather than criminal matter. But gradually investigations began. 8 months later, I received a call from a detective with the Manchester Police Economic Crime Unit. Mr. Bennett, we've received information from Thai authorities regarding your case. I thought you'd want to know that arrests have been made. Siraporn and 3 associates had been arrested in Bangkok on charges of organized fraud, money laundering, and immigration violations. The investigation had uncovered evidence of over 50 Western victims and more than £2 million in theft over 7 years. Will there be a trial? I asked. In Thailand, yes. You may be called to testify, but that would be voluntary given the distance involved. What about recovering the money? I wouldn't get your hopes up. These operations are designed to move money quickly through multiple accounts and jurisdictions, but we'll do what we can. The news should have felt like victory, but mostly it felt empty. Justice was being served, but it wouldn't give me back the years I'd lost, the money I'd spent, or the ability to trust that had been destroyed. Siraporn would face consequences for her crimes, but the damage she'd done to her victims was permanent. Still, there was some satisfaction in knowing that her operation had been shut down, that she couldn't hurt anyone else the way she'd hurt us. And working with the other victims had shown me something important. I wasn't alone, I wasn't uniquely gullible, and I wasn't the first person to mistake professional manipulation for genuine love. The healing process took longer than I'd expected. Even with therapy, even with the support of other victims, even with the knowledge that I'd been targeted by sophisticated criminals, I struggled with shame and self-blame. How could I have been so blind? How could I have ignored so many warning signs? How could I have betrayed Sarah's memory by falling for such an obvious scam? But gradually, with time and work and the support of people who understood what I'd been through, I began to see the experience differently. Not as evidence of my stupidity, but as evidence of my humanity. I'd been capable of love after devastating loss. I'd been generous and trusting and willing to build a new life. Those weren't weaknesses, they were strengths that had been exploited by someone with no conscience. You did nothing wrong, my brother David told me repeatedly. You fell in love. You tried to help someone you cared about, You believe the best of someone instead of assuming the worst. Those are good qualities, even if they made you vulnerable. A year ago, I did something I never thought I'd be able to do. I started dating again. Not online, where I'd learned romance scammers flourished, but through mutual friends and social activities. Slowly, carefully, with boundaries and safeguards I'd never needed before Sarah died. Her name is Margaret. She's a widow like me, and she lives in Manchester. We met through a grief support group, which meant we both understood loss and healing and the complicated process of building new relationships after profound disappointment. She knew my story before our first date, and she shared her own experiences with loneliness and the challenge of trusting again. I'm not ready for anything serious, I told her honestly. I'm not sure I'll ever be ready for anything serious. That's fine, she replied. I'm not sure I am either. Maybe we can figure it out together slowly. 6 months later, we're still figuring it out. Margaret is nothing like Naruemon, nothing like the fantasy woman I fell in love with in Thailand. She's real in ways that are sometimes challenging and always authentic. She has opinions I don't share, habits that annoy me, a past that includes mistakes and regrets. But when she says she cares about me, I believe her. When she's upset, it's about real things that matter to her, not manufactured crises designed to extract money. When she's affectionate, it's because she wants to be, not because affection is part of her job. It's a different kind of love than what I had with Sarah, and completely different from the illusion I experienced with Naruemon. It's careful and gradual and built on knowledge rather than fantasy. It's not the desperate, all-consuming passion I felt in Thailand, but it's real. And after everything I've been through, reality feels like the most precious thing in the world. Last month, Margaret and I were walking through Heaton Park when she asked me something that surprised me. "Do you ever regret it?" she said. "The whole Thailand experience?" "Which part? Meeting her, marrying her, losing everything, or finding out the truth?" "All of it. If you could go back and make different choices, would you?" I thought about it for a long time before answering. I regret the pain it caused, the money I lost, the time I wasted. But I don't regret being open to love after Sarah died. I don't regret being generous with someone I thought needed help. I don't regret trying to build a new life instead of just existing in the old one. Even knowing how it turned out? Even knowing how it turned out. Because the alternative was spending the rest of my life alone, afraid to feel anything, afraid to trust anyone, afraid to hope for anything better. And now? Now I know the difference between love and manipulation. Now I know that real relationships develop slowly, with consistency and authenticity. Now I know that the right person won't disappear when the money runs out or when they get what they wanted from me. And that's enough? That's everything. The truth is, Naruemon did teach me something valuable, though not what she intended. She taught me that I was capable of loving someone other than Sarah. She taught me that I could build a new life after devastating loss. She taught me that I was stronger and more resilient than I'd believed. She taught me the difference between being needed and being valued, between being useful and being loved. Those lessons cost me nearly everything I owned, but they saved my life in ways I'm still discovering. If you've made it to the end of this story, I want you to know that it gets better. If you've been where I was, if you've fallen for someone who seemed too good to be true and turned out to be exactly that, you're not alone. If you've lost everything to someone you trusted completely, you can recover. If you've been so broken by betrayal that you don't think you'll ever trust anyone again, you're wrong. It takes time, it takes work. It takes accepting help from people who understand what you've been through. But it's possible to heal, to love again, to build something real and lasting on the ruins of something false and destructive. The woman I knew as Naruemon is serving a 12-year sentence in a Thai prison. I don't hate her anymore, though I certainly did for a long time. I pity her, actually. She spent years perfecting the art of fake intimacy, but I doubt she's ever experienced real love. She accumulated money and citizenship documents and material security, but she'll never have what Margaret and I are building together: trust, authenticity, partnership based on choice rather than need. I got something she can never have and never understand. The knowledge that I'm capable of loving and being loved genuinely without manipulation or hidden agendas. That knowledge is worth more than everything she took from me. So if this story resonated with you, if you've been through something similar, or if you know someone who has, please subscribe to this channel and leave a comment below. Share your own experiences, your own lessons learned, your own journey from betrayal to healing. Because these stories need to be told, these warnings need to be heard, and these victories need to be celebrated. Love is always a risk, but the alternative to risk isn't safety, it's emptiness. And I'd rather risk everything for the possibility of something real than spend the rest of my life protecting myself from the possibility of being hurt again. Thank you for listening to my story. Thank you for caring about a stranger's journey through darkness and back toward light. And remember, no matter how devastating the betrayal, no matter how complete the loss, there's always the possibility of something better on the other side of healing. Keep watching for more stories like this one, because healing happens in community,